So for more on this, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe and Nikole Killion. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent joining us from the North Lawn, and Nikole is CBS News congressional correspondent joining us from Capitol Hill. Ed, I'm going to start with you because we just heard from the president and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy as they sat down for this meeting this evening. We got a quick soundbite from the two of them, but they both seem to agree that they know the deadline is looming, that they know they need to do something, and they need to have some sort of bipartisan agreement. What did we hear from them, and what do we know at this point about how negotiations are going?
Well, I thought the most interesting part was, that's me, right? Okay. I thought the most interesting part was at the end when the president was asked, is this now just a disagreement over spending levels? And he said, not that alone, which would suggest there are other issues that are either one or both sides are trying to tack onto this. We know, for example, that changes to permitting reform or approving major construction and infrastructure projects, energy projects, was something Republicans and Democrats wanted to raise. We heard the president say in his remarks with the speaker that they wanted to talk about taxes for the wealthy, which would at least be a way to generate some revenue to maybe offset the spending. And so it's unclear what else there might be there in the mix if he's saying that there are issues beyond the actual spending levels that are left to be negotiated. But as you said, as the speaker warned earlier today, this has got to come together now in the next maybe 36 hours or so if legislation is to be written, if it is to be passed in the House, given 3 days to matriculate per the speaker's caucus rules, then get passed, hopefully, then get sent to the Senate, where it has to go through procedural moves again, all before the June 1 deadline next week. And so we'll see now, coming out of this in the next hour or so, depending on how long they talk, whether or not they have a framework that they can send back to get written up and then get voted on.
Yeah, I mean, we have this June 1st deadline, but as you lay out there what they need to do between now and then, there's not a lot of time to do it. Nikole, I know you were on Capitol Hill today talking to lawmakers as they were coming in and out of these negotiations. What was the sense that you were gathering from Capitol Hill? I mean, is a deal imminent?
Well, I don't know if imminent is the word because we continue to hear that there are significant differences. And we have also heard that things are at a very sensitive point right now because of this deadline. So I think, across the board, in talking to congressional leaders for weeks now, they have emphasized that default is not an option, but yet it's still not clear what that off-ramp will be. And again, when we're confronting this June 1st deadline, there have been some Republicans who have suggested that maybe that isn't such a hard deadline. And I did press the speaker on that as to whether or not he believes it's a firm date. Take a listen.
Do you think there's wiggle room on that June 1st date?
Look, that's up to Janet Yellen. That's probably, they decide when that date is. The president may have more information on that, but she's been very clear that June 1st, that's why we took action all the way back in April, even before she said it was June 1st. We thought it was in July. We don't want to be in this last moment. I think that's a terrible way to govern.
And of course, since then, the Treasury Secretary has sent that letter to the Speaker warning that it is highly likely the Treasury will no longer be able to satisfy all of the government's obligations if Congress has not acted by early June, as early as June 1st. So that is still a very hard deadline and one that doesn't leave the Speaker or the President much time to reach an agreement.
Yeah, and Ed, to that note, I mean, what we heard from Yellen there is yet again another reminder, as you mentioned earlier, it's a way to kind of put pressure on this meeting as well, to remind McCarthy as well about this limit, this deadline. But can you kind of walk us through what the practical implications are? I mean, we talk a lot about all this negotiation back and forth. We know and have been talking about some of the sticking points. But what does it mean for everyday Americans who are watching this? What's at stake?
Well, one of the first indicators of the panic could come from the stock market, which today the NASDAQ closed up. The other indexes were down slightly, and it looked as if traders are just waiting and seeing like the rest of us about what exactly is going on here and whether they're getting closer to a deal. If not, you could start to see some real trouble with the stock market later this week. That, of course, starts to affect people's 401ks and their bottom line otherwise. There is concern that spending may get restricted. There are going to be potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people across the country who won't get government benefits or won't get paid if they're a government employee, because Secretary Yellen warning in her letter, now it's highly unlikely the Treasury will no longer be able to satisfy all of the government's obligations if Congress hasn't acted by June 1st. That means they might be able to keep the lights on to some respect, but they won't necessarily be able to make veterans payments, Social Security payments, pay the federal workforce, or make good on other obligations. And once the U.S. credit rating gets dinged like that, that has a ripple effect across the rest of the economy and around the rest of the world at a time when there are countries questioning this power of the dollar and whether the world economy really should be built around the American system. This might give fuel to that fire. But for people back home, again, if you're not getting paid, if your relatives aren't getting their benefits checks, you don't have necessarily the kind of purchasing power you would have had before. It could have a real effect on small businesses, on people's ability to get to work. And so, you know, that's a lot of the fear. The other issue, frankly, is just we've never been here before, so you can sort of game theory what exactly could transpire, but nobody really knows until it happens and until decisions have to be made on what exactly isn't being paid for by the federal government that could then ripple across the rest of the economy.
Yeah, and with that uncertainty and with so much at stake, Biden had returned from Japan over the weekend, cutting short his foreign trip to meet with leaders here. And Nikole, we actually now have some sound from Kevin McCarthy in the Oval Office. Let's take a listen.
I think at the end of the day, we could find common ground, make our economy stronger, take care of this debt, but more importantly, get this government moving again to curb inflation, make us less dependent upon China, and make our appropriation system work when we get done, right?
I'm all for making appropriations work. Now that I don't have to be there to do it.
Okay, so Nikole, some agreement about getting appropriations to get to work here. But from your conversations with McCarthy and members on Capitol Hill, what do you make of what he was saying there? I mean, it seems like he was laying out their side of the argument.
Yeah, well, what the speaker has continued to insist and what he told me is that from February onward, he has been pressing the president not only to meet, but also, again, to rein in spending, that we have to spend less than we spent this year. And, you know, that's an interesting distinction to make because he's also said we have to spend less than we spent last year, right? So if you keep in mind that Republicans passed their debt limit bill last month, where they basically want to cap spending at fiscal year 22 levels. The White House is proposing let's freeze spending at the current levels for fiscal year 23. So that's kind of one of those areas where there has been some negotiating back and forth. There's also the issue of work requirements. The speaker continues to emphasize that that is very important to House Republicans. They want stricter work requirements for government assistance when it comes to things like SNAP, Medicaid. He did not necessarily say whether or not he wants additional cuts with respect to SNAP, which was something that emerged late as something that potentially Republicans may seeking. But interesting, on the other side of the coin, even as the speaker presses for less spending, he has been pressing, or Republicans have been pressing for more defense spending in the upcoming fiscal year. Again, the speaker not going into a lot of detail about the rationale and reason there, but again, that just gives you some insight into some of the distinctions and areas of disagreement between both of these sides.
All right, still quite a few sticking points, but they are sitting down, as we know, and we'll hear more about what comes out of that meeting, and we'll bring you the latest. Ed O'Keefe and Nikole Killion for now. Thank you very much for joining us.